Everyone, welcome back to the workshop, and today we are looking at the latest from Ortur, and that is their 22-watt laser module. This is intended to be an upgrade to what I'm told is any one of their lasers. We're going to be specifically looking at it at the LaserMaster 3. I've gotten their original one I've had for about a year, used it quite a bit, really like it. However, it's had a few little quirks here and there, and we're going to take a look to see if they made some improvements besides just the power on this one. So if you're interested in the latest from Ortur with the 22-watt laser module, stay tuned. We're going to jump right into it. All right, so as I mentioned, I want to focus on the differences between the 10-watt and the 20 or 22-watt version of the Ortur laser module meant for the LaserMaster 3. So I have the original LaserMaster 3 set up, and we're going to first look at the differences in the module, maybe some of the other differences in some of the components that come with it, and then we'll compare some real-world tests on the same material, trying to use the same sheet, see how the differences are. So let's jump right in by looking at the module itself. So those of you who have been working with an Ortur LaserMaster 3 will recognize this as the 10-watt module. And one of the things when I first looked at this was the size of it. This is a very compact, very lightweight module, which I think really goes towards Ortur's speed and accuracy that they have been able to get with their machine. When you have a much lighter head to move around, it's faster to accelerate and more precise with less power requirements from your steppers. Well, how does it compare to the 22-watt? Well, here's the 22-watt, here's the 10-watt. There is a bit of a size difference, as you can see. It is a little bit taller, it is a little bit more square, and there is a little bit more weight difference. However, let's take a look at another 20-watt module that I recently looked at. That is the longer B2. And that is a substantial size increase over your typical 20-watt laser module with the Ortur module. So they've done a great job on keeping this compact and lighter weight than its competitors, which I think is going to help them have an advantage in their speed and accuracy. So what are some of the other differences amongst these modules? Well, one of the big complaints on the 10-watt module was that the power and signal plugged into this cable over here, and that could have a possibility of working loose through jobs. So they fixed that, and this is not permanently fixed, but to remove this cable, you actually have to take this plate off, and there are some wires in there. So this is not exactly readily serviceable. You're not going to be able to swap modules quite as easily. You will need to remove some of the clips from your cable management and unplug this wire from the connection point on the left side of the gantry. However, that does eliminate the issue where this cable may inadvertently pull out while working on a job. They do still have the press-in air assist. It's integrated into the design, and so you will be able to add your air hosing here. It is fairly flush mounted, and that's similar to the 10-watt, so removing it, you got to be intentional. It's almost frustrating, except for the fact that when it does grab, it's held and it's not going to come out on accident. But just pushing down on this can get a little tricky once that hose is in there. It does still use the dovetail clamping system on the back. So as you see, they both will ride on pretty much the same module. They are the same shape and size. The 20-watt does have 3 mounting holes so that you have a little more adjustability to where your screw goes in, whereas this one's just in the center. And so it's a pretty decent design and it works well. They still do have the little metal plate in there, so it kind of helps protect that screw from biting into the dovetail on the gantry side. So decent design, is still well implemented, and it does mean that these will work on the same rails. However, there are other components that do need to be upgraded for these to work. All right, as far as focus, on the original 10-watt, we had the little flip down lever in front that came down. You would lower it down and touch it off your material. On the 22-watt version, they have kind of a similar thing, but it just kind of slides out to the side and comes down and sticks down just about 4 or 5 millimeters underneath the shroud. And then you just slide it back up out of the way. I like that they're integrated into the module. I'm glad it's not a piece that you need to hold on to that can get loose. So that's I love seeing when they're integrated into these. The original 10-watt had this clear, well, not clear, but this orange shroud as far as a safety shield for some of the light radiation and such, whereas this one has a pane of glass in here. Now this does work fairly well to block out the light. However, as you'll notice, as I spin this around, this piece is all one piece. There is no removing this shroud to be able to have easier access to your laser nozzle and keep it out of the way. So some people are going to find that a little bit of a detractor. It does make it a little bit harder when you're using the laser spot to frame and you're trying to see through just that. So that may be a detractor that some people don't like. Now on the 10 watt, you were able to pop this shroud off and unscrew it by hand. It just threaded in there. Whereas on the 20 watt, it just is accessible. It still just threads out. And so, but it is much shorter. And so there's a lot less space in here. But as I said, you can't take the shroud off without destroying this module. Well, not destroying it, but you're going to destroy the shell of it. So it's just a little bit less flexibility as far as how you use it, but still gives you easy access to this. Now in there is a lens cover, and it that is to protect the main focus lens. It's just a piece of glass. They do provide you with a spare, and then they provide you with a little spade that'll allow you to get in there and remove the ring, replace your cover lens, and keep those your focus lens cleans. Something that you do want to check on these things fairly often. Make sure that you're not getting smoke and debris in there, because that will affect the performance, and eventually that can crack over time if it gets too dirty and that laser light keeps hitting it. But they do offer spares. It is easily replaceable, so something to keep an eye on. All right, the next big noticeable difference is going to be in your power supply. So here I have the original power supply for the Laser Master 3, the one that came with the 10 watt, and this is a 24 volt power supply with 4 amp supply rated at 96 watts. This is the one that comes with the 22 watt module, and as you can see, there's a pretty decent size difference. But they still do have your typical PC plug on the back. And this one is rated again at 24 volts, but it can supply 6 amps of power at a total of 144 watts. So that is obviously going to be helping make up the difference in the power going to the module and such. So now other than that, there are some internals that are going to be different. So if you were buying this brand new, you're going to get a new Laser Master 3. It's going to come with the right board and all the power supplies. You're just going to assemble it as a brand new laser. If you're an existing Laser Master 3 user and you want to upgrade to this, you will get some upgrade parts. It's not just the module. You're going to get the power supply. You are also going to get the front rail, which includes the new controller board, as well as the other accessories that go with to hook this up. So we're going to go over the upgrade in maybe a future video. Today, we're just going to be focusing on the differences between the original 10 and the 20 watt. But as you can see, if you are familiar with the Laser Master 3, it still looks like a Laser Master 3. It still has basically the same footprint, same form factor. All your original accessories from the 10 watt, such as your folding feet, the roller rotary or the chuck rotary, they're all going to have the same features. That rotary is going to plug into the back through the port and the switch. You still have your wireless adapter. You still have all your cables on the side and your buttons up front. So aesthetically and kind of physical shape and size, the frame is the same. There's no changes to that. Now for the people looking at this laser for the first time, there is going to be assembly with this, and this may be your first laser that you need to assemble. However, Ortur is really decent. They have a really nice printed manual here that walks you through the whole setup. They'll have a list of the parts, and then they have very large photos and pretty decent text showing every step of the way. So I'm not going to go through the whole build here. The manual goes pretty well. There are other videos on the Laser Master 3 if you're interested in building this that will help you through it. Just know that they do have a pretty good manual. It's going to walk you through it. It's going to take you about half an hour to an hour to assemble this following the instructions. And of course, if you ever have questions, put them down below and I would be happy to try to help you out if I can. Now, along with that manual, one thing that I really appreciate Ortur including is these spec sheets. And they're actually separated out between laser GRBL and light burn, but it gives you a lot of different materials and then their recommendations for, you know, your power, your speeds and your feeds and such like that. So these are always, you know, a good starting point. I always recommend with any new material that you do your best to try to run a material test. And I have a video on that I will link down below if you're interested in that. But these are a great way to get kind of your starting numbers that should dial you pretty close, get you in the ballpark of where you need to be for that. So it's really nice to see them. They're fairly extensive. It's multiple pages of various materials and settings. So really nice when they include this and give you kind of a head start on working with your laser. So let's jump into the performance differences between the 10 watt module and the 20 watt module. So what I did was I hooked up the old 10 watt and ran the tests on that first so that I could get a baseline of where that machine is performing. My machine is a little bit old. I've been using it for the past year, but it's still in very good operating order. I don't feel like it's had any degradation of power. So I feel this is a pretty good comparison between the two. So let's jump into what I was doing. If you're a longtime viewer of this channel, you know I like to start my base settings with 3mm Baltic birch plywood, 3mm craftwood. It's what a lot of these lasers are used for, is kind of these thinner, lighter materials that you're going to be cutting out shapes, you're going to be cutting out patterns, ornaments, things like that. So I went ahead and took that, and we started out with our grid here on the right. And as you can see, we got through this material pretty well. And it topped out in that 500 millimeters a minute range at 90 to 100% power. I didn't feel like I needed to go above that because I did have to just lightly press the top one out, so I kind of felt that's my maximum. So then I went ahead and on the same sheet, I ran the test. This is with the 20 watt, and I made the mistake, forgot to turn the air on the first time. So I did leave this in there as the no air object, but you can kind of see it's a little bit darker. There's a little bit of extra overburn and residue on there. And that's just indicator that air assist wasn't quite working properly, because I didn't have it turned on. So then I ran again with the very same settings. I ran it with air this time. And as you can see, we were cleanly getting through at 500 millimeters a minute, even 600 millimeters a minute at 80% power. So I thought, hey, let's push it a little bit higher. And here we go. We went on to actually push it up to what we've got, 750 millimeters a minute cutting through this 1/8 inch or 3mm material at 100% power. Now, I always caution people that running it at your maximum setting like that may leave you with a little bit of disappointment, because there can be imperfections in your material. And if you're having to push it through at 100% and it's just barely squeaking through at 750 millimeters a minute, I recommend you back it off a step and go at 700. So I'm going to say that we have made the jump from 500 millimeters a minute up to 750. So a pretty good increase on this material alone. So next, I wanted to jump into some more materials you might find locally, and that's going to be at your big box stores. So I have some material that I've picked up at both Home Depot and Lowe's, which are going to be here in the US, some of the more popular places to find material just locally. And so this is your 1/4 inch sanded plywood from Home Depot. So again, on the right, we have the 10 watt performing, and it is cutting out at 350, just squeaking out that last corner in there, 350 millimeters a minute at 100% power. Whereas when we jumped up to the 20 or the 22 watt, we were getting 550 millimeters a minute, cutting through cleanly at 90 and 100% power. So pretty decent increase there as well. And also for the Lowe's, this is their 5mm or 5.5mm revolution ply. So this is pretty close to 1/4 inch as well. So this shows a drastic difference, and this can kind of just show you the difference between material, a 1/4 inch sanded material from one place to another, which is why I never recommend trusting someone else's settings on some other material just because it's the same thickness. But here you see the 10 watt barely squeaked through 250 millimeters a minute at 90 and 100% power, whereas the 22 watt was able to cut through at 450 millimeters a minute and 90 and 100% power, nearly doubling the speed that we can cut through this material based on that one test. All right, now one of the big buzz things that laser manufacturers like to talk about is the thickness of the material it can cut through in one pass. And that's fine. It's great to be able to know you can cut through thicker material, but I get concerned at the slow speeds you have to run to get through in one pass. So I'm looking more at what is the thickness of material I can get through and have a really clean pass, even if it's multiple passes. I'd rather go faster and have less charring and less smoke build up on the item, but still get through cleanly than just do a single pass. So I ran my test not as a single pass, but what would be realistic for this machine to cut. So I took some material, and I have a few different samples that are a little bit thicker. This poplar took 2 passes to cut through, and it was 150 millimeters a minute, 100% power, air assist on, And in the video, you kind of see the thickness and the clean cut. And there's just a little bit of an overburn on this back corner. So here again, if I sped it up just a little bit more, maybe added a third pass, making it through fairly cleanly. And more importantly, it's leaving the cutout without a lot of extra charring from having that laser sit there in one spot too long. So knowing that, we went ahead and jumped up to, I believe this is 3/4 inch aspen. And so again, this is 3 passes this time, same power setting, 150 millimeters a minute, 100% power. And again, it cut through cleanly, didn't leave a whole lot of like excessive charring. You're always going to have some on there. And then the backside fairly clean, just a little bit. Now this was elevated, it didn't have it sitting right on the honeycomb, just to make sure that it wouldn't get any extra flashback. So sometimes that will help or hinder your cuts being clean, but definitely cutting through 3/4 inch. Now this is a softer wood. This aspen and poplar are not your dense, thick woods like oak. So keep that in mind as well. But yes, it can cut through fairly cleanly, thicker material. Of course, plywood is made up of different layers that the grain is going alternate patterns, and there's a layer of glue in there. So I wanted to see how it could get through some roughly 1/2 inch Baltic birch. And so this does have a thinner top and bottom veneer, but most of the other veneers are fairly consistent. And as I'll show you there, this, if we can get it focused, there we go. This is the material we were testing, and so it's got multiple layers in there, which does add to the complexity and the difficulty for this laser to get through it. But again, 150 millimeters a minute, you're seeing a theme there. It's about as slow as I like to run through some of this thicker material. We were able to get through this one in 2 passes, and it was fairly clean. Again, on the backside, just a little bit of overburn on that one spot. So again, I think in real world applications, I'd probably speed it up, maybe add a pass to each of one of these to minimize that kind of overburn on the very entrance and exit points of it. But again, this is about almost 12 millimeter material, roughly 1/2 inch, just a little bit under, and multiple layers. So fairly impressed at the capabilities, the cutting power of this laser. All right, so of course we not only use our lasers for cutting, but a lot of times, or more primarily, we use it for engraving. And so wanted to run a speed test to see the comparison of the 10 watt to the 20 watt again. And so I ran a raster test on the 10 watt, and here you can see this is going from 10 to 100% power and from 5,000 to 15,000 millimeters a minute. And this was based off of my previous use of this. I knew that was kind of the range I would get into. Now the 10 watt can go fairly fast, but at those speeds, you start losing some of your depth of color and such, just because it's going too fast. And so this was kind of my baseline for that one. Here again, I'll show you that. And then I didn't change the numbers at all, just switched to our 22 watt laser module. And so again, this is 5,000 to 15,000 on 10 to 100% power. And as you can see, much darker at the top. As a matter of fact, it blasted through the layers of material almost all the way through on that 100% and 5,000, and fairly dark up there at 10%. So here I'll show you the two side by side so you can see them. They are pretty big improvement in power over the same speed. So knowing that, and the 20,000 millimeter minute rating on the 22 watt, I went ahead and bumped my speeds from 10,000 up to 20,000, 10 to 20%, or 10 to 100% power. And here is our color gradient there. So now this, of course, this is Baltic birch plywood, and your settings again are going to vary from material to material. But on this one, you can see a pretty big improvement where we can get some speed increases and still get the colors and the shading that we're looking for. So with that information in mind, I wanted to see how well could this engrave a fairly detailed photo and at higher speeds. So I went and found a nice steampunk toad or frog online that I could run through this, and as you see, it actually came out fairly well. And that's one of the concerns. As we go up in power, we often go up in focus spot size. And in this one, this is roughly about 7 inches square, give or take. And it is still fairly well detailed. And I could probably have played a little bit more with our settings, gotten just a little better contrast and detail out of this. But for what I got on my first run, I was very pleased that this was running at those higher speeds and it was keeping the quality. It never jumped those sidelines. As you can see, it didn't skew, it didn't jump off track. And so we are definitely getting some improvement. So if you're someone who's doing some engravings and you want to get better performance and cut down your cut times or your engraving times, this is going to be something you may want to consider. Now, with that focus spot size, they do claim that this 20 watt has a 0.08 by 0.08 millimeter focus size. And that's very impressive at the 20 watt, 22 watt range. And for two reasons. It's nice to have a square focus spot so that when you're cutting out objects that they're going to be consistently offset. So if you're playing with kerf, you can just set your kerf to be one number and it should be consistent and you should get well cut out parts that you can adjust for. Secondly, to be able to focus that 20 watts of power onto a smaller area means you're going to have a more effective burn. Now, I don't have a really good way to test and confirm that that's what the focus spot is. What I can do is run a kerf test. And so this is kind of what I did with that. And so you can see I cut out 4 squares just to be consistent and get some averages. And what I'm doing is I'm taking the measurement of the square, the cutout square piece, and then I'm taking the measurement of the outside edge as well. So then if you take the one number, subtract it from the other number, that should be the width of that beam. Now, of course, that's 2 because we're actually measuring the cut here and the cut here. So then we divide it in half. This should give us roughly the beam width of the laser on this specific material. Now, every material is going to be slightly different because a laser beam is not straight up and down. It's kind of hourglass shape, and the thicker the material, the more variation you're going to get. Also, the more efficient it burns, the faster it burns through, the less extra burning that's going to widen that shape. So the kerf isn't indicative of what the focus spot is, but it gives you a good setting to base your adjustments on. But we can also compare the kerf size from this side to these sides to at least infer if it might be square. And so I ran all my numbers and here's all the math on my sheet. The breakdown was that my average kerf in one direction was about 0.16 millimeters and in the other direction it was 0.23. So I don't feel like I'm getting an exact square beam on this. I'll have to do more tests to find out for sure. Either way, those numbers are fairly low. They're fairly tight, so I'm very happy with them. I'm just going to have to take that into consideration anytime I'm doing very fine interlocking detail or inlays that you're going to need to make sure that your design fits without any really big gaps. And those differing numbers are going to give a little bit extra work to make that happen, but not something that we can't work with. So one last comparison I wanted to make, and this goes a little bit outside the Ortur to Ortur comparison, but I thought I'd take a look at a similar 20 watt machine and see how it's comparing. So if we look at our 3 millimeter or 1/8 inch material, you can see over here is one of the latest lasers, 20 watt lasers I've tested versus the Ortur 20 watt. So we are seeing on this one, it was topping out, barely squeaking out at 550 millimeters a minute and 100% power. Whereas with this one, we were getting up to about 750 millimeters a minute on the same material. So as far as 20 watts go, a little bit of a bump increase over one of the competitors. And then looking at the 1/4 inch material, again, we have here on the right side, we've got another 20 watt module that is topping out at 450 millimeters a minute, just barely squeaking out at 100% power. Whereas here, again, it was 450 millimeters, but we were able to bump it down to 90, which in my mind tells me I'm going to have more success getting through any abnormalities of this material. So it is kind of edging out a little bit over some of the most recent 20 watts that I've tested. Maybe one of these days I can do a more in-depth shootout between some of them and really kind of focus in on testing same material, same conditions. But for a 20 watt, it's looking like it is really performing at the higher end of the pack than some of the others. So I think that's where I want to leave this one here. I don't want to go too long or too in depth. Like I say, we're going to cover the actual upgrade of an existing LM3 to the 22 watt module in a future video. So if that's something you're interested in, stay tuned. I'll have that out shortly. And of course, as always, we're going to be doing more projects and playing around, really seeing what we can test this with. But hopefully this gave you an idea that if you're looking at this 22 watt module as an option for you, that this has helped you out some. I do try to get a little more technical, a little sciencey to try to compare results versus just throwing some projects at it, but we are going to jump into that as well. If you're interested in this machine, I will have links down below to where you can find out more and where you can purchase them. Some of them will be affiliate links, and if you use them, I do get a little kickback. So I appreciate you if I helped you make that decision, you using that. But as always, no pressure. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below. I try to get back to those as best I can. I do this as kind of a fun hobby and want to share with everybody else, get information to help them enjoy this as well. So leave that comment. If this video helped you out, hit that like button. And if you want to find out more what I'm doing, see more of these in the future, hit that subscribe button. Otherwise, in the meantime, I'm going to get back to playing around out here, testing some things. And I hope you can get out into your workshop and make something too. We'll catch you next time.